Welcome to a special edition of Adult Autism in 60 Seconds. I'm William O'Flaherty, the creator of this project. The following is a much longer interview than planned where a friend of mine, Connor Salter, interviews me about how, at the time of this recording, it was just 2 months ago, I came to be diagnosed on the spectrum. I only did very light editing, essentially, to this recording because I wanted to show how unpolished I can be. That is, even though I created the questions for Connor to ask me, and he was told he could make changes, I did not write out my answers, so you'll hear me thinking out loud about what I've been learning so far.
So, to start off, William, you have shared elsewhere about being diagnosed with ADHD back in the 1990s. How did that experience come about?
Well, at that time, I was a guidance counselor, and I was first working with junior high and then elementary after my first year. And so it was as I was working with, actually probably both. You know, it's one of those things to where you don't always remember the exact details. You just know when things kind of happened. But just like we'll talk more about in a few minutes about my autism diagnosis, it was in working with kids and coming across those with the diagnosis and then hearing about the symptoms and going, I wonder if that might fit me. And so from there, then I went and got assessed and was diagnosed with, I can't recall at the time if they were still calling it this. I think they transitioned from ADD and versus ADHD to where now it's just ADHD, non-attentive type, or hyperactive, or combined. And so in today's world right now for 2024, that diagnosis would be ADHD non-attentive type. And so it was from working with children that I realized, and then I pursued that. And as I was learning and working with children that, medication can be helpful for ADHD. It doesn't, change, it doesn't cure things. And definitely when we get into talking more about autism specifically, there is no cures there. There can be medication that can manage other secondary symptoms that is not specific to autism. But for ADHD, it's a little bit different. I'm not an expert on ADHD, but just from my experience, I mumble all that to say I did pursue some medication, but it seemed to work for a short time. And then ultimately I decided, well, I'll just try to impose structure on my life, and from that can help me to manage my ADHD. And if that didn't seem to be working, then I would look concerning maybe something for medication. And then before we started recording, you had asked, and it fits right here to acknowledge that even with my newer diagnosis to be on the spectrum, I didn't lose my ADHD diagnosis. I don't know in terms of teasing out for other individuals, they may get reassessed and find that, well, the symptoms can be totally explained by autism. But if someone still fits the criteria, and so I fit both now. But I initially had just the ADHD diagnosis from back in the 90s.
Thanks for giving a very clear answer on that and getting into some of the ADHD meet autism questions. Now, did being diagnosed with ADHD positively or negatively affect you ultimately getting your autism diagnosis?
Well, it's hard to say in many ways, or it's probably a false way of looking at it positively or negatively, although at times I can think about it that way. And for some people, that could be their experience. In some ways, I could say it had a negative impact because then I didn't think I needed to look further to see if maybe there was something else. And so that can be a negative thing. But then positively, then it opened me up to the possibility that with ADHD now falling under the umbrella, or maybe it did back then, but I didn't look further into it in terms of now a terminology that is definitely used is the neurotypical versus neurodiverse or neurodiversity. And so ADHD is considered to be part of that. And so, in one sense, it did make me not think I needed to explore further. and what we knew, or at least what maybe a lot of people were trained in, wasn't as complete as we have now. There's always the concern that, when something is better understood, you only have a handful of people who truly do, and then it takes a while before it gets into other people who are in that field that may further understand it, if that makes sense. But that's that's my thoughts at the current moment about that.
Now, as I understand it, you initially wondered if you might be autistic about 20 years ago, so the early 2000s. What was happening in your life at that point, and were you assessed for autism at that point?
Yeah, well, I've if anyone has read some of the things, if you're listening to this around the time where it's being released in 2024, I've had the opportunity, some through Connor, actually, in terms of sharing some different aspects here. So for this, it's where I was going through a really big life transition. I was in the middle of a divorce, and then shortly after that, I lost my job essentially because I blew the whistle about something. And so I had a lot of free time to reflect on life. And I was in a stable situation in terms of financially. And so before I ultimately did get another job and just kind of considering and reevaluating, I had explored that and wondered, but one of the things that I had happening at the time, if that's not the exact words that I'm looking for, but one of the things that maybe made it difficult in terms of pursuing it, or I didn't pursue it further, was a misunderstanding that I had, even though we haven't talked about specifically about my training in terms of being a mental health counselor. My original degree from 1991 is in counseling, but I wasn't going into the field that dealt with working with autism. So I had a perception of what autism was, and I thought, well, a key symptom that I thought was kind of defined autism, but it doesn't, is that, people on the spectrum really aren't very empathetic. And I thought, well, I've been a Christian for a while, and I know the importance of empathy, but then maybe I'm not the best at it, so let me try to pursue it. So I did try to pursue it. I called a place up, and I asked specifically, communication is something that people on the spectrum may not always be the best at, but but we do try to be precise. Whether the person on the other end hears it, I guess, or if we conveyed it as clearly as we thought we did, can be up in the up for grabs, so to speak. But I asked and called a place, and they scheduled me, and then I get there, and it's like, okay, I'm here. Oh no, we don't do that. We don't do evaluations for adults to see if they're autistic. And so I fortunately didn't get charged for that appointment. That then was immediately canceled, and then I just never pursued it. I did ultimately do some counseling. Even though I'm a mental health counselor, it's kind of like a doctor. A doctor may not always be the best at taking care of themselves, or seeing someone when they might be needing medical advice and whatnot. But I do advocate people to, even if they are counselors, to to be open to counseling and such. So yeah, I hit a kind of a roadblock, or I let that keep me from pursuing it, and then I just moved on with life. I was able to get a new job, found a new church, and move on with my life until later. Then I, had situations to where I came to wonder, well, could it be autism?
I see. So, given that experience you'd had that was kind of a roadblock, as you put it, how did you finally decide to pursue getting assessed?
Right. Yeah. Well, so I mentioned in terms of my overall degree, but I haven't noted in terms of the type of work that I've been doing now for 16 years, and that is doing. It's rather complicated. It can take really well, maybe not 20 minutes to explain, but in order to fully understand it, it might take that much of an explanation, but I'll summarize the type of work that I do. It's family counseling that is working primarily with a identified child, but we work with the whole family dynamics. But in the last 6 to 9 months, I was having a caseload where there were kids that had either been recently diagnosed with autism or they were needing to get diagnosed, and came across in trying to help people. Okay, there's a long waiting list if they went to what we thought was really the only place that could really do an evaluation, and found out that there was a place that I'm not sure how long they had been doing it, but it may be here less than 5 years, so to speak. But I've been doing this work for 16 years, so it just never came up on the radar. So I found out that this place where the families I work with could get their child assessed also did it for adults. And so I, again, because of learning about the different kids and them being diagnosed, and it's like, some of those symptoms, because we haven't highlighted, but I'm sure our listeners here are quite aware in terms of, since it is called a spectrum, there is a wide range within what can be diagnosed as being on the spectrum. And so the level 1, which has less needs of support, that's the key terminology, which we'll maybe talk about later in terms of terminology that I've learned or am continuing to learn, but in the way that people within the autistic community approach things or view things maybe differently in terms of some of the vocabulary. But nevertheless, the challenge then was, or it wasn't a challenge here in terms of just talking about how I got diagnosed. The interesting thing was, it's like, okay, well, if this person is like this at this age, I can see some similarities, so it might be a possibility. So I pursued it, found out that the insurance I had could be used for this place, and thought, okay, it's going to be worth it. And so February of 2024 was when I got the results. We started the ball rolling. It was a kind of a 3-step process. And so just a few days after I turned 60, I learned I was on the spectrum.
Now, I'm curious then, what is the autism assessment like, and is it the same for everybody?
Well, that's a question that I need to get more informed on, but my understanding is while the key assessment, because there were other assessments done just to kind of tease out some other things, just to make sure. But mine was the ADOS, the Autism Diagnostic Observation, and I always forget what the last one was. The S stands for. But anyway, so that is a key one that is done. I'm understanding that there can be some other things, but that one has been considered the gold standard. So the place I went to did that, but also there's an interview process, kind of a screener, so to speak, to see if it's worth doing that assessment. I don't know if it was mainly to prove to the insurance that you've kind of done that, or if it's just on a practical level. That's what would be done. Sometimes insurance requirements can be kind of an added hurdle that's maybe needless. But nevertheless, so people's experience could be different. Now, the main thing that I do know is because you can get a neuropsychological is more thorough, and it includes aspects of evaluating if someone is on the spectrum. Because I know with some of the children I was working with, they were going to be going for that, but that's something that there wasn't anyone locally to be able to do that. So I wanted to feel this topic because, or address this to say that everyone's experience may not be as simple as mine, but mine was basically a 3-step process, an initial screener, essentially, the ADOS with some other assessments, and then after that got processed, and scored, then a few weeks later, I had the results. And so essentially, the appointments were like a couple weeks apart. So a couple weeks apart. So once I had the initial screener, it was within 6 weeks that I had the results.
I see. Thanks for explaining that. Now I'm curious. Then, what was your reaction when you finally got diagnosed?
Well, I mean, in some ways, since we're recording this, not quite 2 months after the official diagnosis, I'm still processing it. And one of the things which, I may do a follow up in terms of talking about what the things I've learned, or just with the website that I do have, or it's really just a YouTube channel. There's no separate website. Part of the reason for doing that, the AA 60 Adult Autism in 60 Seconds, is to help me process and understand. And so, in some ways, I've kind of come realized that the emotional impact maybe hasn't fully hit me. In fact, I learned that not unique to autism, although there are some crossover symptoms, but there's a fancy word called alexithymia, which I hadn't been familiar with. Maybe in some of my training it had come up, but it didn't kind of, stick with me what it meant. But it's more specifically when a person has difficulty even understanding or recognizing what their own emotions are, as well as those of others. Now, that may seem like, well, that's kind of impossible. You kind of, what are you, a robot? Are you describing? But it's a matter of, sure, I can be aware of when I get angry or if I'm happy, but any variables, it's kind of hard, or you don't want to maybe be more aware of it. In fact, one of the key things in terms of my reaction is, I guess two things. One, I walked into getting the results thinking this changes everything and this changes nothing. In other words, my life is still what it is. I may have a better understanding of some things in my past, but I don't want to let that have a lot of regret. Move forward with what I am learning now, and hopefully make even better decisions, and just trusting, as we haven't yet talked more specifically about my Christian faith, but just trusting that as I trust the Lord, that He's going to make all things work together for good, as Romans 8:28 talks about, for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. And so, dramatic pause, because I've lost my train of thought. It was the changes everything, changes nothing. Where was I headed to? I was headed to one main thing: reaction.
Like General Patton, you shall return.
I shall return here. Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that I was going to bring in with my other main point, but then I sidetracked myself. Well, that's part of the ADHD. So I'll just continue in a second here. I'll do a countdown for my nice editing, and then I'll figure out, because it'll just fit in kind of humorously, that I distracted myself because I wanted to be sure I made the other point, and I lost my other main point. But then as I say that, it might come back to me. So I'm going to take a deep breath. I might take a drink of water too. All right, here we go. And I remember it now. Here we go. Well, after my last few words, I realized I lost my train of thought, which is part of my ADHD. I distracted myself by making sure I brought in some other point, and then I forgot my other main point. But then I decided to pause, since this is my podcast and I can do the editing, I can edit it out. But I wanted to acknowledge the ADHD factor in terms of distracting myself. But the other reaction or thing that I realized that really impacts, is going to probably have the greatest impact is, and this may sound strange since I do work in the area of counseling, but I kind of jokingly would think to myself, and maybe might say to others, I really hate people. I just don't like, having to interact with people. It's like, and then it's like, and then I realized, well, wait a minute. understanding or beginning to understand the uh, autistic side that was always there, but I didn't know it, is it's this difficulty with the social interaction is what I hated, because I realize, you know, being around people, interacting with people can be a positive experience, but then because of the autism that was undiagnosed, it had more. It was more challenging. I 60 now, and haven't had too many difficulties. I mentioned about being unemployed because of the whistleblowing, and that was like a 3-year period that I was unemployed. Actually, it may not even be 3 years, because it's one of those things you kind of want to block out. And so, in terms of, I was able to be in a financial situation to weather that, but it came to a point to where it's like, I'm going to have to get some, have to go back to work. But anyway, but yeah, so the biggest revelation is I didn't like the social interaction. So it wasn't like I didn't like working with people because I was a counselor, but then I had training, and one of the things that I haven't yet teased out if it's just a autism thing, but in terms of patterns and predictabilities and things, you can kind of learn and mimic. One of the things that I don't remember if we're going to address here, but different terminologies I'm still learning, and so that's something that's helping me. But in terms of overall reaction, I'll finish up answering by just saying, learning that it wasn't people I didn't like, but it was the negative experience with the social interaction. And so having that insight, then I give myself a break in terms of, okay, William, this is going to be, it's like, instead of hoping, well, maybe it won't be difficult, it's like, okay, you're going to have difficulty, but that's okay. Or if you try to interact, and it doesn't go well, then hey, or if you want to avoid interactions, like, do you just go through a drive-through, or do you go in and order food from a fast food restaurant? It's like, I don't want to go inside. In fact, now with some of the apps and stuff, some of the places I still have to go inside, and I can't do drive-through, or maybe I just hadn't asked it in the right way or whatever. But it's like, I don't want to interact with people. I just want to get my food. But so that's been the biggest thing, to where, give myself a break. If I want to not interact with people, or if I'm going to realize it may not go well, or I mean, it may go fine, but my self-talk, my thoughts in my mind may be more negative, but now they don't have to be, because it's like, okay, I understand that I may not always get the social interactions, and how to mingle or whatever, do the small talk, and that's fine. Life goes on, as they say.
Thanks for the detailed answer. Now, I'm curious because we've talked about the curious journey of getting diagnosed as an adult. So I'm curious, as you look back on your life now, are there things that stood out more obviously as being the result of your autism?
Yeah, there has, and I'm sure there's going to be more. I'm trying to think about something today, but how I say, how I guess most people, will have these passing thoughts about things that they experienced, a few months ago, a few days ago, years and years ago. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can recall any specific challenges. Although as I'm speaking, I'm going to probably come up with some examples, and people go, well, what do you mean? Those sound pretty specific to me. But I can look back on some different things, and I've made a list, which I was going to maybe bring up, but I'm not going to, when it's like things that I kind of vaguely knew could be autistic related, and just kind of snapshots of things. Like, I remember I was a safety patrol. We had a 1-week camp. And so the kids, and I guess the counselor had to be in on it. They did a practical joke to where we all stayed in the same, well, we had different cabins, but you stayed in the same cabin the whole week. But then I vaguely remember just, one morning waking up in another cabin, and I don't know if I sleptwalk. I think my family had mentioned some things about sleepwalking, but anyway, but they apparently woke me up, told me that some other reason that I had to then stay in the cabin next door, and then I woke up, and then it's like, it's one of the kind of the odd memories to where you kind of like, what was going on there? But nothing more than just kind of a practical joke thing, or I can think of times to where it's like I was more serious than maybe other kids. And one of the things that, and this is probably the only other example besides maybe some more recent ones as an adult, but as a kid, really as a teenager, I was diagnosed with hypoglycemia. And so low blood sugar. And so it's like, okay, you have to follow a strict diet. So what did I do? I made detailed diary type entries of keeping track of, because I wanted to be, do the right thing. And so that's one of the tendencies, at least for me, that manifest in terms of the autism is being structured and like making lists and things of that nature. I've never really had just maybe one overriding interest, although right now people could say the C.S. Lewis would be something. But I can look back and think of a lot of different things that I was this really strong interest in. And that's something in terms of other people I've been watching on YouTube sharing their experience, that they will get really interested in something, and then they'll reach a point to where they're not interested in, and they move on to some other obsession. But yeah, that's something that I guess I alluded to earlier, and I'll probably maybe leave it at just the following for now. Is I know I'm going to think about some things and go, oh, I can be explained by the autism, or the autism definitely had an impact. If I knew that I was autistic, then things might have been different. But I can't change that, and so I accept that. And try to, from this point on, any things that might come up that the autism might be a factor in terms of how I see things or I don't see things, then I will try to learn.
So I know you've said that it's only been 2 months as of recording. So what has your brief journey been like so far since being diagnosed?
Well, yeah, I mean, life, as they say, is a journey, or at least if you think about it that way, in terms um, of an ever continuing learning process, I guess is the key thing I take away from that perspective. And so, just some of the things, I'm learning again. I made a passing reference to it earlier. It's like some of the terminology, like some say it's either way. It's fine with them for the following, which is my perspective. Do I consider myself to be a person with autism, or do I like the terminology autistic person? I don't get hung up on that. I found some people that my YouTube has the first several videos. I've changed it now to where, instead of noting that I am an autistic person doing this because it is helpful, I just simply, because of the nature of my work, I just put what is the clinical thing. So I put ASD level 1. And so because ASD says autism spectrum disorder, some people kind of cringe at that within the autistic community, because there's still the debate, or the baggage that goes with it being considered a disability or disorder. And so I'm learning in terms of navigating the terminology, and then some groups associated with autism, and like they started out really questionable, and they've changed some ways, but have they changed enough? Things of that nature. But on a more positive end, I'm learning some different things, like I was familiar with, but didn't think of it in the way I do now, have a better understanding. Like several years ago, there was a big craze about the fidget spinners, which a person with ADHD would use, but also someone on the spectrum. It's a very useful thing to have or do. But anyway, the term that I somehow missed, if it was shared, is that's called stimming. It's or that's just kind of the shorthand word. And so how useful that is, as well as then this was, again, I already mentioned this earlier, the alexithymia. That's not unique to autism, but learning about that. And then, gosh, so there's several other terms that for right now my mind's drawn a blank. But in terms of just understanding some of the different aspects, as well as, embracing the I don't know if the word ambiguity is the right word, but just the fact that because there are unique traits to each individual in terms of, even, overall, no two people are alike. That is very true with those on the spectrum. They have to, meet the criteria to be diagnosed, but there can be some variability. And one of the things I guess I want to be sure to note is that in terms of the need for support on the different levels, even, the level 1 is just needing support. We haven't said this yet. And then level 2 is needing substantial support. And level 3 is needing very substantial support. But even with that, what kind of support a person may need can vary from day to day or maybe even moment by moment. And so that's important. So in terms of things that I've learned so far on my journey is that I could probably, if I took a sabbatical from work, which I don't plan to, I can't afford to, and tried to like become a specialist in this, that it would take a while to really just grasp everything. And so I want to do that to some extent while I'm doing my other regular type of work, and hopefully help others who are being newly diagnosed, because I'm learning that even people like my age, 60, that's happening, as well as people in their 20s and 30s where they didn't know that they were on the spectrum, because we have a better understanding of what that is, and how it impacts people, and it's usually beneficial for people to know. And so I wish someone would have said to me, yeah, you probably on the spectrum, you should find out. And it's been a very empowering thing in terms of just living and growing as a person.
Thank you. That's a very good answer, and I appreciate how you've gotten into some of the nuances and the need to have the community and the support and willing to explore the complexity of some of the terms. Now, part of this, of course, is getting a little bit into the faith journey, which we've talked a little bit about. So let's really, I think, come back to that a little bit. How would you say, how has your beliefs helped or hurt your journey?
Well, I believe overall it has been very, very helpful. I've noted and probably said it too many times, overemphasized, that I just turned 60, and I became a Christian. If I hadn't clearly said that, I don't know that I have, in 1980. So I was just 16 years old. And so while there can be a lot of different experiences people have, to where people are maybe exposed to a faith that is just a bunch of rules and such, I was fortunate after actually being in an environment to where it was kind of the opposite. I don't know. I hesitate to kind of name denominations and such because I think even within any of the denominations that do hold to the core Orthodox Christian views, that there can be Christians even if the denomination overall has strayed on certain things and whatnot. That is questionable. But anyway, all that to not get into the different debates and such, but just that I definitely feel that my faith has helped. And one aspect is that we've already established that my training is in the area of counseling, but 16, finished high school, 18. Then as I was doing my college journey, which that could be a whole podcast in terms of some of the experience, but when I did change to psychology, and just the whole transition or changing to that does relate to a lot of the undiagnosed aspect of even for ADHD as well as autism. But when I did switch to psychology, I was fortunate to come across many Christian books dealing with that, as well as the denomination at the time I was going to. They had an individual who, in the 1950s, their wife suffered from what's called postpartum depression, which back then was not very well known, or was just becoming understood. From what this person shared, I've not done any research in that, but anyway, that from where they lived and the people they were around, that was that experience. And so they were trying to deal with helping their wife. And so this person ultimately then, in addition to being a minister, got training in counseling, and he was well grounded. And so anyway, his training, which I did, most of the time, I think, apart from the fact that I did my master's thesis on his theory of counseling, I did more stuff that was more elective, and I didn't pursue getting any college credit for it. But I was able to then learn ways to apply things within in the psychology or counseling realm that didn't disagree with Scripture, and so it was a really beneficial. And so that was a strong thing that helped me, as well as wanting to read my Bible, having a pattern of that, which people on the spectrum, they tend to they can get into a good habit pattern. So I was able to do that. Christian music and the lyrics was a positive influence. And so while I understand some people's exposure or faith journey may be different than mine has been overall positive and a very strong driving force.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that, William. I suppose technically this conversation doesn't really end because, of course, your autism journey goes on and your understanding of how it fits with your faith and with your life and everything else goes on. But it's been a great conversation. I'm hoping will benefit many people. So thanks so much for being willing to talk about this.
Well, thanks, Connor, for being willing to be the interviewer. And thank you, the listener, for taking the time to learn about my journey so far. I'm sure I have a lot more to learn about myself and autism in general. In fact, I don't believe I mentioned this during the interview, but I haven't yet read through all of my evaluation outside of officially getting the diagnosis, being on the spectrum. Anyway, be sure to check out my other videos on this channel, which are usually no more than 60 seconds each. Also, check out my Facebook group and feed on X, formerly known as Twitter. There are links in the description to them. Also, there are links to an online article where I was interviewed for crosswalk.com by Connor, and an audio interview with Connor with Pastor Stephen Bedard, who is autistic, for one of his podcasts. Thanks again for listening. I'm William O'Flaherty for Adult Autism in 60 Seconds.